Why did no one meet her eyes that morning? The mess hall was alive with chatter, metal trays scraping, boots stomping in and out. Yet at the long wooden table she sat at the end, untouched porridge cooling in front of her. Men spoke in clusters, leaning over maps, passing cigarettes, telling jokes too loud for this hour. Not a single word thrown her way. Not a single glance that lingered long enough to acknowledge she was there. It wasn't hatred. No, it was something colder, indifference. She lowered her gaze to the tin spoon, hands steady though her stomach twisted. If they saw her as invisible, maybe that was easier. Easier than facing what her file said. Easier than wondering why command had kept her on when others would have been dismissed. Easier than asking the question she prayed no one would. Why her? Why here? The bell rang, sharp, metallic, echoing down the corridor. Briefing time. She stood, tray untouched, and left the hall with the same silence she carried in every step. The command tent smelled of damp canvas and stale coffee. A projector hummed faintly, casting a blur of green and gray across the wall. Maps layered with trenches, hills, a jagged line of no man's land that looked more like a scar than geography. Officers leaned against crates, field jackets unzipped, collars damp with sweat. "Sector 4, the captain barked, his voice gravel, his hand drawing a rough circle over a trench line. "That's where they'll push. We've had reports of movement. Night patrols caught glimpses, shadows, maybe scouts. They're preparing something." Eyes shifted to the men assigned. Names were called, orders crisp. No one argued. They nodded, shoulders squaring, jaws tightening. Soldiers always knew when a storm was coming. Then the pause, the one that made her throat tighten. "And you," the captain said, not looking directly at her, as if her name left a bitter taste. She straightened. "Yes, sir." "You'll be there too. Second line, Eastern Trench. Observation. If it escalates, you know what to do." A ripple moved through the room. Not words, not laughter, just that silent air soldiers shared, the kind that said, "She's not one of us, but she's here anyway." She nodded once, no questions. But inside, her pulse whispered the same line over and over. Not survival, redemption. The trench was mud and memory. When she first dropped down the ladder that afternoon, the walls closed in with the smell of wet soil, oil, and fear layered too deep to wash away. Sandbags slumped under the weight of rain. Water pooled at her boots, dark and stagnant. A rat darted past, unbothered by men with rifles. "Your spot's down there," a private muttered, pointing without meeting her eyes. "Don't get in the way." She walked past him, brushing against damp canvas sheets that sagged overhead, until she found the narrow alcove cut into the wall. A crude bench, an ammo crate, and above it, a slit view of the horizon. No one else followed her. They grouped further down, voices low, their cigarettes glowing faintly in the dim light. The sound of matches striking was louder than their conversations. She set her rifle down gently, slid a hand over the cold barrel. The metal steadied her. It always had. But even here, in this narrow slice of earth, her mind was louder than the war outside. She could hear it. The old question, the one that had haunted her since the night that had rewritten her entire life. What makes redemption possible, and who gets to decide if you've earned it? Night crept in slowly, bleeding the sky into shades of steel. The trench sank deeper into shadow. Every sound sharpened, the crunch of boots above, the drip of water, the faint rustle of someone shifting against sandbags. "Eyes up," the sergeant whispered as he passed, his voice low but firm. "Stay sharp tonight." She nodded, even though he didn't wait to see it. Her rifle rested across her lap. She cleaned it by feel, cloth sliding over steel, each motion precise, deliberate. Fingers worked silently, like muscle memory had long replaced thought. Down the trench, someone coughed. Another soldier muttered about his wife's letter arriving late. A third confessed he hadn't slept in 2 days, nightmares chewing away at the edges of rest. Their words hung in the air like fragile threads, small, human truths stitched into the fabric of waiting. She stayed silent, she always did. Because if she spoke, someone might ask, and if they asked, she would have to tell them the truth. The truth about the night she had failed. The truth about the one person she hadn't saved. The truth about why she had volunteered for this assignment in this trench when she could have walked away. But not tonight, not yet. Hours bled together. The trench became a rhythm. Watch, breathe, listen. Every gust of wind through no man's land felt heavier than the last. The silence was not peace, it was anticipation. And then just past midnight, something shifted. A sound. Soft, barely there, but undeniable. Her eyes snapped to the horizon. Between the jagged wire and the shattered remains of trees, shadows moved. Not animals, not the wind, deliberate, measured, too many to be scouts. Her breath caught shallow in her chest. The sergeant's voice hissed down the line. Positions, quiet, don't move until I say. Soldiers readied rifles. The air grew thick. Every man gripped his weapon like it was the only thing keeping him alive. She pressed her cheek to the stock, sight rising to her eye. The scope cut the night into fragments, a blur of mud wire helmets, movement sharper now, shapes crawling forward under the veil of darkness. Her finger brushed the trigger. But then something else. One of them turned, just enough for moonlight to catch his face. She froze. Not because of who he was, she didn't know him. He was just another soldier, enemy uniform, mud streaked across his cheek. But in that instant, his expression, it wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear. Fear that mirrored her own. And in that heartbeat, she remembered, this was the war that had swallowed her redemption whole. This was the war where survival wasn't the same as living. The sergeant's whisper snapped her back. Now fire. Shots cracked through the trench, explosions split the night, the silence was broken, the storm had arrived. She fired once, twice. The recoil punched her shoulder, brass shells clattering at her knees. Soldiers shouted, ducked, reloaded. Muzzle flashes lit the trench in strobing bursts. But she wasn't firing blindly. No, each shot was measured, precise, guided by the cold calm she had taught herself to wear like armor. And yet behind every pull of the trigger, the same thought echoed. If I do this right, if I endure this night, maybe redemption waits on the other side. The trench roared with chaos. Men screamed orders, prayed under their breath, begged for ammo. And through it all she stayed steady, her face unreadable, her eyes locked forward. No one cheered her aim. No one noticed her composure. No one knew why she fought so hard to stay alive. But she knew. And that was enough. Dawn was hours away. The battle wasn't finished. The trench still shook with gunfire, but in her chest, beneath the armor of silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not peace. Just the faintest flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Why did the world sound so loud, and yet so hollow when the shooting stopped? The trench was a graveyard of echoes. Shell casings clinked under boots. Smoke drifted like ghosts across the dugout. Somewhere down the line, a man cried out for a medic, his voice breaking on the edges of pain. Another voice answered, but too faint, too desperate. She lowered her rifle slowly. Her cheek peeled away from the stock, skin raw where the metal had pressed through the night. Her shoulder throbbed, not from injury, but from the weight of every recoil she had absorbed in silence. Around her, soldiers moved with that strange rhythm of aftermath, frantic, yet dulled by exhaustion. Reload, check wounded, replace sandbags torn by shrapnel. No one celebrated, no one dared to, because even in survival there was no victory, only delay. She wiped mud from her hands and leaned back against the wall of the trench. Her breath trembled, a whisper in her own ears. She closed her eyes just long enough to feel the stillness, but it wasn't still, not truly. Because inside her the question came back, sharper this time, louder. How many lives make up for one failure? And if the scales never balance, why keep trying? The sergeant's voice cut through. "We hold until dawn, then we rotate." His words were simple, routine, but she caught the way his eyes lingered a second too long on the bodies covered with canvas. He carried them in his silence, the same way she carried hers. A private shuffled closer, face pale beneath streaks of grime. "They almost had us," he muttered. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, flame trembling before the wind swallowed it. "If they'd pushed harder," his voice trailed off. She looked at him, at the boy no older than 20, smoke curling around his eyes as if it wanted to hide the fear written there. He caught her gaze for just a moment, then dropped it, muttering, "Guess you're steadier than most." It wasn't a compliment, not really, more like disbelief. She said nothing, only adjusted her rifle, cleaning the chamber with precise, practiced motions. If she spoke, if she opened her mouth even a fraction, the weight inside her might spill out, and she couldn't afford that. Not here, not now. Dawn crept like a hesitant hand across the horizon. The world revealed itself in fragments, barbed wire slick with dew, broken helmets half buried in mud, the outline of trees stripped bare by artillery. The trench smelled of cordite and wet earth. As light settled, replacements arrived. Fresh faces with eyes too wide, boots too clean. They stepped into the trench like children entering a haunted house, unsure of which shadow might reach for them first. The sergeant dismissed the night shift. One by one, soldiers climbed the ladders back toward camp, shoulders sagging, voices low. Some carried stretchers, some carried nothing at all. She lingered. Hands on the ladder, she hesitated. Her eyes swept once more over the field, the no-man's land scattered with broken silhouettes. Shapes that had faces, families, stories. Shapes that, in another life, might have been sitting across from her at a table, not aiming rifles through the dark. Redemption wasn't there. Not in victory, not in survival, it was still out of reach. She climbed. The base was quieter than she expected, quieter than it should have been. She walked past rows of tents, boots dragging through mud that refused to dry. Men slumped on crates, chewing rations without taste. Someone played a harmonica, the notes thin and cracked, as if even music was tired here. In the medical tent, she saw the price of the night. Rows of cots filled with groaning men. Medics moved with mechanical precision, hands stained with iodine and blood. A young soldier clutched a bandaged stump where his hand had been hours before, eyes staring through the canvas roof as though searching for a sky that wasn't there. She turned away before the memories came back too sharp. Her bunk was little more than a cot and a blanket. She sat on the edge, unlaced her boots slowly, fingers stiff from cold and tension. When she leaned forward, her reflection caught in a dented piece of tin hanging as a makeshift mirror. The face staring back wasn't one she recognized anymore. Mud streaked her cheeks. Dark circles carved hollows beneath her eyes. Her lips pressed into a line so tight it seemed afraid to open. But the eyes, they were the same eyes that had seen everything fall apart that night, long ago. The night her story had broken. The night redemption slipped through her fingers. She reached for the dog tags at her neck. Not hers, not anymore. The edges were worn, letters almost rubbed away by the constant friction against her skin. She closed her fist around them, breath catching. She whispered so quiet the sound barely touched the air, "I'm still trying." Sleep never came easy. When it did, it came in fragments. Her dreams were stitched together by gunfire and silence, by faces she couldn't save, by the weight of choices no one should have to make. She woke more exhausted than she had closed her eyes. By afternoon, she was summoned again. The captain's tent was dim, maps spread across the table, corners held down with empty mugs. He looked up only briefly when she entered, then back at the papers. "Last night was just a probe," he said flatly. "They were testing us. Something bigger's coming." Her stomach tightened. She didn't ask how he knew. Command always knew more than they admitted. "You'll go back tonight. Same sector, observation first. If it escalates, you know what to do." The same words, always the same words. She saluted, turned, and left without speaking. But as she stepped into the light, the question pressed harder than ever. If she kept doing this night after night, trench after trench, would it ever be enough? Or was redemption an illusion dangled just out of reach, punishing her for daring to hope? That evening, as she prepared her gear, a corporal approached. He was older, lines carved deep into his face, his uniform patched more times than new. "You were steady last night," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of something unsaid. She looked at him, surprised he even acknowledged her. He lit a cigarette, drew in smoke, then exhaled slowly. "First time I froze," he muttered, eyes narrowing at the memory. "Cost my buddy his leg, never told anyone that, never forgave myself either." Their eyes met. For the first time, someone wasn't looking through her. "You keep showing up," he said simply. "That counts for something." Then he walked away, leaving only the smoke between them. She stood frozen, his words heavier than any rifle she had ever carried. Because deep down, part of her wanted to believe him. That showing up mattered. That silence wasn't failure. That maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about enduring the present. Night came again. She returned to the trench. Mud clung to her boots. The sky stretched black and endless overhead. Soldiers shifted uneasily, knowing the enemy was out there, waiting, watching. She took her place in the alcove. The rifle rested across her knees. The horizon stared back, blank, merciless. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing leveled. And in the heavy quiet, a thought whispered through her mind. "Tonight I'm not just surviving. Tonight I'm answering for everything I couldn't change." The darkness thickened. Somewhere beyond the wire, the enemy stirred. And once more she waited. What did silence mean when it stretched longer than fear? The trench was too still, not the peace of quiet but the weight of waiting. Soldiers shifted uneasily, their boots scraping mud, rifles clutched too tight. No gunfire yet, no shadows moving across the wire. Just that heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that makes men doubt their own breath. She sat in her alcove, rifle across her knees, cheek pressed against the damp wall. Her eyes traced the horizon through the slit. The black sky had swallowed the moon tonight, and even the stars seemed afraid to look down. Every nerve in her body screamed, "Something is coming." But she didn't move, not yet. The sergeant's voice broke the quiet in a whisper. "Stay sharp. No one fires unless I give the word." Orders were clear, but clarity never made waiting easier. She could hear one of the privates 2 places down, muttering a prayer under his breath, over and over, until the rhythm itself became part of the trench. Another soldier chewed on nothing, his jaw working as though gnawing the edge of fear itself. Her own fear was quieter, hidden deep, but it was there, pressing against her ribs like a blade that never dulled. "Tonight will test you. Tonight will ask the same question again." Her fingers brushed the dog tags at her neck, hidden under her collar. The metal was cold, heavier than any weapon she carried. Movement. She caught it first, a flicker along the wire, low, crawling, too coordinated to be accident. Her scope found them, shapes moving in pairs, spreading out like the fingers of a hand reaching across no man's land. She counted softly in her head, 1, 2, 5, 7. More. Her breath stilled, her finger hovered near the trigger. But then memory surged, unbidden, sharp. Another night, another silence before a storm, another set of orders ringing in her ears. Only that time she had hesitated. It had been a convoy, not a trench. Months ago, the desert wind biting, stars sharp in the sky, she'd been on overwatch, hidden among rocks, rifle trained on the road. Command's voice buzzed in her earpiece. 2 trucks incoming, confirm identity, wait for call. She had waited, listened, watched. The headlights cut across the dust, growing brighter. The convoy slowed at the checkpoint. Her scope caught the driver's face, lips moving, nervous. She saw the glint of something in the backseat, a hand moving too fast. Her gut screamed, her finger curled. But then the order came too late. Engage. She fired, but not fast enough. The explosion tore the night apart. Fire swallowed the checkpoint. She remembered the screams, the blast wave, the way the ground itself seemed to shatter. And when the dust settled, one body lay too still, too broken. Not an enemy, not a stranger. A friend. His dog tags were handed to her days later, cold metal, a name pressed into steel. She never gave them back. A shout dragged her back. Movement left side. The trench erupted with tension, rifles lifted, fingers tightened, hearts pounded against ribs. Her eye locked into the scope again. The enemy was closer now, shadows darting between wire, helmets catching faint reflections. They were trying to breach silently, blades and wire cutters flashing faintly in the dark. The sergeant hissed, "Hold, wait for my word." But they were too close, too many. And in that split second, she didn't wait. Her shot cracked the silence open. One shadow fell, then another. The trench erupted, gunfire lighting the night in bursts. Men shouted, scrambled, fired wildly into the dark. The enemy surged forward, answering with their own storm of bullets. Mud sprayed as rounds hit the parapet. Sparks flew from wire struck by tracer fire. The trench became chaos again. She was steady, always steady. Her cheek welded to the stock, breath controlled, eyes narrowed, each shot measured, chosen, no wasted motion, no hesitation. But her heart was louder than the rifle. Don't fail again, not tonight. Don't let anyone pay for my silence, not again. To her left, the praying private screamed as a bullet grazed his arm, spinning him against the wall. She ducked, dragging him down before another round could finish the job. His eyes were wild, breath ragged. "Stay down," she muttered, pressing his hand against the wound. He nodded, shock swallowing words. Then she was up again, rifle barking fire into the night. Minutes blurred into something timeless. The trench roared with smoke and rage. Soldiers cursed, prayed, screamed. The sergeant shouted orders until his voice broke. She kept shooting, kept breathing, kept moving. Her shoulder burned with each recoil, but she welcomed the pain. Pain meant she was still here, still answering for the night she couldn't change. And then silence again. Not complete, not final, but sudden enough to sting. The enemy pulled back, shadows melting into the dark, leaving broken bodies tangled in the wire. The trench groaned with exhaustion. No cheers, no victory, just the hollow awareness it wasn't over. Not yet. Later, when the medics came, she sat against the wall again. Mud caked her face, sweat glued her hair to her skin. Her hands trembled only when no one looked. The private she had pulled down leaned near, his voice cracked. "You saved me." She shook her head. "No, you held on." But his eyes lingered on her, full of something she didn't want. Recognition, gratitude, the kind that made her chest ache. She turned away, stared at the wire. One life saved, one still gone. The scales don't balance, they never will. As dawn bled across the horizon, the corporal found her again. Same lines carved into his face, same steady presence. He sat beside her, wordless for a long moment. "You didn't wait for the order," he said finally. She stiffened, expecting judgment. But his next word surprised her. "Good. Sometimes orders come too late." Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Not to agree, not to explain, not to confess what memory had driven her to pull the trigger. He didn't ask. He only lit another cigarette, passed it to her, and said, "You keep showing up. That's all anyone can do." She didn't smoke, never had, but she held it anyway, the warmth against her fingers strangely grounding. For the first time in a long while, she let silence feel less like punishment and more like survival. That night when she lay on her cot, exhaustion pressing down, the dog tags pressed against her chest heavier than ever. Her eyes burned, but no tears came, only the whisper she had carried since that night. "I'm still trying." And for a fleeting moment, in the fragile edge of sleep, she thought she almost believed herself. Why did the letter feel heavier than the rifle? It wasn't thick, not more than a few pages, folded unevenly, edges frayed. Yet when she held it in her hands, it carried the weight of everything she'd tried to bury. She had found it on her bunk, shoved under the blanket like a secret. The handwriting was familiar, precise, looping letters that reminded her of a time before war had carved hollows into faces and hearts. Before the nights of endless waiting, of bullets piercing silence, before redemption became a whisper she chased through mud and wire. She traced the lines with a fingertip, every word pressed into her skin as if to remind her that somewhere, someone still saw her as more than a soldier. Someone still remembered the person she had been. "I'm proud of you even if I can't say it out loud, even if we don't talk. You carry more than I ever could, and I see you in every moment you survive. Come home safe, or at least hold on to who you were." Her chest tightened. A lump rose, threatening to choke words she didn't have anymore. She had forgotten how to feel this way, forgotten how to let someone's hope in her soften the hardness she carried like armor. The trench waited outside, unchanged. Mud slick under rain, sandbags sagging, the wire tangling like the scars she bore. The letter pressed to her chest, she realized the impossible. She had been running toward redemption all these months, but the path wasn't through bullets or survival. It was through the memory of who she had been, who she wanted to protect in herself, even here. The first gunfire of evening shattered that thought. The enemy returned, slower this time, deliberate. No full assault yet, just probes testing, listening, watching. Each shot that cracked across the trench wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that survival demanded vigilance, and hesitation could cost lives. She slid into her alcove, rifle ready, the letter pressed safely in her pocket. Her fingers itched for the familiar weight of the scope, and yet for a moment she let herself remember softness. Memory, like a candle flame, fragile in the wind. A new soldier joined the trench that evening. Young, trembling, eyes wide, mouth moving without sound. She watched him from the alcove, nodding the way he hugged his rifle as if it were a lifeline. She had been that way once. A version of her still existed there, somewhere under the mud, the gunpowder, and the dog tags. He froze when she glanced his way. Didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared. "You'll be fine," she said softly, the words foreign in her own ears. Not a command, not a warning, just something human. He blinked, swallowed, and nodded once. That tiny, fragile acknowledgment reminded her why she had survived this long. Not for glory, not for medals, not for orders, but for moments like this when the living still mattered, when hope still whispered through mud and fear. Hours passed like shadows stretching. She cleaned her rifle, checked her ammunition, but her mind wandered, threading through memory after memory. The night she had failed, the friend she couldn't save, the endless nights she had endured, alone in the trenches, the silence pressing in. And now this, a letter, a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. She pressed it closer to her chest. The ink had smudged slightly, but the meaning was clear. Someone believed in her. Someone believed she could carry more than the battlefield demanded. And yet guilt remained. The trench, the mud, the blood, all of it reminded her that no amount of hope could erase what she had lost. She had to live with it, and live with it fully. The first movement came near midnight. A figure darted across no man's land, shadow merging with shadow. She lifted her rifle, sighting. The enemy probe, testing again, and she exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Her shot rang out precise, controlled. The figure collapsed. A second moved. She fired again, her pulse a steady drumbeat, each beat counting the difference between hesitation and action. Yet beneath every action, every shot, she felt the ghost of that past failure. It whispered, "Do not falter. Do not let history repeat itself." The corporal had been right. Sometimes survival was about showing up. And sometimes it was about the courage to act when hesitation would kill. In the lull, she glanced toward the new recruit. He was trembling again, but he wasn't crying. He was alive, still clinging to the thread of courage that allowed him to move with her. She let him see a flicker of calm, a fraction of steadiness. She didn't smile, not yet. That would be too much, too human for the mud and wire around them. But her eyes held something else: acknowledgment, recognition, assurance. The night stretched on. Moments of gunfire punctuated stretches of near silence. The trench became a rhythm of survival, of breathing, of memory, of presence. She pressed her rifle close. She touched the dog tags beneath her collar. She felt the letter in her pocket. And she realized the threads of humanity were still here if she allowed herself to notice them. Morning broke pale and thin. The enemy had withdrawn again, leaving scattered wire and empty tracks. No full assault this time, just testing, probing, measuring like they were studying her, her trench, her resolve. The corporal returned to her alcove with coffee, the steam rising faintly in the cold morning air. No words, just a gesture, a shared presence. "You're holding," he said, voice low. Not a compliment, not an evaluation, just fact. She nodded and for the first time allowed herself to feel something other than guilt. Pride, perhaps, not loud, not bold, but enough to remind her that endurance carried its own weight, even in silence. Later, when the trench was quiet, she unfolded the letter again. She read it slowly, letting each word sink in. "I see you," it said. "I know you're trying. You are enough even if the world doesn't see it." She pressed it against her heart, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe it. Belief didn't erase guilt. It didn't erase the memories of failure. But it reminded her why she continued to return to the trench, night after night, rifle in hand. Redemption wasn't a destination. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't even survival. It was showing up for herself, for the living, for the hope that still whispered even through mud, blood, and fear. The sun rose higher, light cutting through the damp, illuminating wire and torn earth. Soldiers moved in muted patterns, tending to repairs, checking weapons, speaking in whispers to avoid startling the horizon. She watched, observed, remembered. The new recruit stumbled and nearly fell into a puddle. She grabbed his arm, steadying him without a word, a small gesture, barely noticeable. But in that moment she felt something she hadn't in months: connection. Not through orders, not through battle, but through care. The trench, the mud, the enemy, none of it mattered as much as this. Humanity survived here in fragments, in quiet acts. And she would protect it, even if it meant carrying guilt a lifetime, even if it meant nights without sleep, even if redemption remained just beyond reach. Because survival alone was not enough. She touched her dog tags, reached for the letter in her pocket, and whispered once more, "I am still trying, I will keep trying." And for the first time in many nights, that wasn't just a promise to herself. It was a vow to everyone who might still need her. Why did the sky feel like it was holding its breath? The wind had shifted, cold and sharp, slicing across no man's land. The trench trembled under distant artillery, a low, guttural rumble that whispered of what was coming. Soldiers moved quietly, rifles slung but ready, hands brushing the cold metal as if touch alone could steady nerves frayed by months of waiting. She crouched in her alcove, fingers brushing over the dog tags beneath her collar, a habit that anchored her. Every heartbeat echoed inside her chest like a drum, every breath a reminder. Tonight, the line would break or it would hold, and survival would not be enough. Because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was answering for everything: the failure she carried, the lives she vowed to protect, and the redemption she had promised herself she could earn. The sergeant's voice cut low through the trench. "Positions, hold steady, eyes on the wire." The soldiers moved like shadows, ghosting along mud-slicked walls, adjusting sandbags, checking ammunition. The young recruit stumbled slightly, jaw tight, fingers trembling as he secured his rifle. She leaned forward, whispering without looking up. "Steady yourself, breathe, watch, wait." It wasn't an order. Not quite. Just a fragment of guidance, human and grounding. He nodded, swallowing hard, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier than her rifle ever had. The first probe arrived like a ripple across still water, figures slinking low over the wire, knives cutting through strands, shadows blending with night. Her scope traced them, eyes narrowing, pulse steadying. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. The first shot rang. Her rifle barked, sharp and decisive. One down. The second figure froze, then bolted. She fired again, precision over panic, watching the recoil kick her shoulder and burn her chest with its memory. Around her the trench erupted. Men shouted, boots slipping in mud, rifles cracking into the darkness. The assault was sudden, sharp, violent. And yet she remained the calm at the eye of the storm. Each wave of attackers brought memory flooding back. The convoy, the checkpoint, the friend she couldn't save, the night she had frozen. Every past hesitation surged through her veins like ice, sharpening her senses. She saw, with a clarity born of fear and guilt, exactly where each shot needed to land. No hesitation tonight. Her finger curled over the trigger. A shadow darted left. She fired clean. Another crouched behind wire. She adjusted, fired again. She wasn't just defending a trench. She was defending the fragments of herself she had almost lost. Explosions rocked the earth. A shell struck nearby, showering the trench in mud and debris. Men screamed, stumbling over broken wood and sandbags. The young recruit cried out as a splinter grazed his arm. She lunged, pulling him down, pressing his wound with steady fingers. "You'll live," she muttered, not a lie, not a promise, but a vow forged in action. He nodded, fear breaking just enough to allow trust. She released him only when the wave passed. Another round would come, another shadow would fall, and she would be ready. Because she had learned, every second of hesitation had a price, and she had paid enough. Hours passed in what felt like seconds. Mud clung to her boots. Sweat and grime streaked her face. Her rifle clicked empty once, and she slammed in a new magazine with precise motion, ignoring the burn in her shoulder. Around her, soldiers were falling into rhythm. Shouts became measured, steps deliberate, breathing shared in unspoken cadence. She glanced toward the corporal. He caught her eye, a silent nod passing between them. No words were necessary. They were soldiers, but more than that, they were human. Survival was not just living, it was keeping each other intact, even if broken. And then, a figure emerged from the darkness differently than the rest. A commander on the enemy side, moving deliberately, directing others, checking positions. The battlefield shifted subtly. The tide of the assault could turn here. Her heart pounded, not with fear but recognition of the opportunity. If she could neutralize him, maybe this night would tip in their favor. Maybe fewer men would die. Maybe redemption could take a step forward. The sergeant barked orders, but she didn't need to wait. Her scope tracked the man, breath controlled, aim steady. The rifle's weight familiar, grounding. She fired once. The figure stumbled. Others froze, confused. Chaos erupted among the enemy line. And she fired again, measured, precise, each round a sentence written in mud, blood, and quiet resolve. The trench around her roared with renewed energy. Soldiers pressed forward, seizing the advantage she had carved. And she remained steady, counting every heartbeat, measuring every breath, ensuring that each life she could save was saved. Somewhere in the midst of the chaos, a memory surfaced unbidden. The letter, the words pressed to her chest. "I see you. I know you're trying. You are enough." She felt the weight of it now, heavier than any rifle, stronger than adrenaline. The hope in that simple message was not naive. It was not fragile. It was a reminder that endurance, courage, and presence mattered, even when surrounded by fire, death, and mud, even when redemption seemed impossible. She fired again, each shot sharper, more deliberate. the rhythm of responsibility aligning with her heartbeat. The assault lasted hours that felt like lifetimes. No man escaped unscathed. Mud, blood, and smoke wove together, blurring the lines between the living and the fallen. She moved through it like a ghost, steady, precise, present. Not heroic in the loud way stories often tell. Heroic in the quiet, in the careful placement of action, in the small mercy given, the lives preserved. A young soldier tried to slip past the trench edge to retrieve a fallen comrade. She grasped his shoulder, pulling him back. No words, just a look. A silent command, he understood. He stayed alive. Another soldier dropped beside her, arm bleeding. She applied pressure, muttered reassurance in low tones. Small acts of care, unnoticed by command, unnoticed by the world. But she noticed, and that was enough. By the time dawn cracked over the horizon, the enemy had withdrawn. The trench was littered with broken bodies, twisted wire, and spent shells. Soldiers moved quietly, tending wounds, checking rifles, breathing in shallow, ragged rhythm. She sank into her alcove, mud-streaked and soaked, hands shaking from tension and adrenaline. Her rifle rested across her knees, the dog tags cold against her chest, the letter pressed in her pocket like a talisman. The young recruit approached, eyes wide but alive. No words, just a nod. And in that simple acknowledgment she found a moment of quiet pride. She had survived, she had acted, she had made choices that saved lives. And yet, as always, redemption remained elusive. Not gone, not denied, just distant, waiting. Her chest heaved with exhaustion. She closed her eyes, listening to the morning, the drip of rain, the low murmur of men, the faint whistle of wind across broken wire. And she understood, with a clarity only pain and action could bring, that redemption was not a destination. It was the act of standing again after every night, after every failure, after every moment when survival alone would have been enough. She touched the dog tags, pressed the letter against her chest, whispered again, "I am still trying, and I will keep trying." And in that whispered vow, in the quiet aftermath of blood and mud, she found the fragile spark that would carry her through the nights yet to come. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The trench had settled into a ghostly stillness. Smoke drifted upward in lazy spirals, carrying the acrid scent of spent rounds, blood, and wet earth. Morning light cut pale lines through the torn canvas, illuminating the devastation with a clarity that was almost cruel. Soldiers moved like shadows, their steps cautious, almost reverent. Boots slipped in the mud, rifles clutched in hands too heavy with exhaustion. Somewhere a man wept quietly over a friend he could not save. Another cursed the morning, shaking mud from his helmet, silent rage etched across his face. She crouched in her alcove, rifle across her knees, eyes sweeping the trench. Nothing moved without purpose. Every soldier carried the echoes of last night, the fear, the adrenaline, the choices made in seconds that would haunt them forever. She touched the dog tags beneath her collar, cold, solid, unyielding, and somewhere deep inside she felt the faint tremor of something she hadn't allowed herself in months: relief. The young recruit approached, shoulders trembling, boots caked with mud. He looked at her, searching for words. She offered none, only a steady hand brushing mud from his sleeve. "You're okay," she said softly. Not a command, not reassurance in the traditional sense, just acknowledgment. He nodded, swallowing hard, eyes darting to the wounded further down the trench. "We survived," he whispered. "Yes," she said, voice tight, "but surviving isn't enough." He froze at her words. They weren't criticism. They weren't despair. They were a reminder that survival was just the first step, and in this world the next step was always harder. The corporal arrived, silent as ever, a thermos in hand. He set it beside her and nodded toward the trench. "Assessment first," he murmured. Not a question, not an order, just fact. She moved through the trench, eyes scanning. Soldiers injured, tired, shells of themselves, but alive. The new recruit followed quietly, learning that in these moments words were secondary. Observation, presence, action, those were the tools that mattered. They came upon a stretcher, half buried in mud, the man atop it groaning faintly. She crouched, hands steady, applying pressure to a wound with practiced precision. The corporal held the other side. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to. Every act was a statement. We endure. We do what must be done. Redemption is earned not in accolades but in these small, necessary choices. She moved farther along the trench, touching each soldier briefly, offering a nod, a hand on the shoulder, a glance that said, "I see you. You are still here." Some stared back, eyes wide, hollow. Others returned her gaze with quiet gratitude. It was never loud, it never made headlines, but it mattered. It was human. And for her, that human connection, fleeting as it was, became another thread in her fragile hope. Later, when the wounded were stabilized and medics returned, she sat alone, back against the mud wall. The sun had risen fully now, washing the trench in harsh, revealing light. Every splintered plank, every tear in canvas, every scar on mud-slicked walls was visible, evidence of last night's violence. She closed her eyes, breathing in the smell of earth and cordite, listening to distant voices, trying to reconcile the storm outside with the storm inside. Memories surfaced unbidden. The convoy, the checkpoint, the friend she had failed, every hesitation, every misstep, every moment where her hands hadn't acted fast enough. But she pressed her palms against her face, forcing herself back to the present, because guilt alone could not sustain her. Survival alone could not satisfy her. She had to act, to endure, to witness for the living. Redemption was not a gift, it was a burden, and she carried it willingly. The corporal returned, offering her the thermos. "Coffee. Don't drink it all at once," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. She accepted it, warm against her hands. The liquid didn't taste like much, but the heat spread through her chest, grounding her. For a moment she allowed herself a breath of relief. She wasn't broken, not completely. Around her, soldiers moved quietly, tending to equipment, clearing debris, checking ammunition. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, but their eyes carried something new, cautious hope. They had survived the night. They had endured. And she had been the silent presence through it all, guiding, supporting, acting when others faltered. But survival always left shadows. She moved to the edge of the trench, looking out over no man's land. Wire twisted like scars across the dirt, craters filled with water reflecting the pale morning sky. Somewhere beyond, the enemy lurked, unseen, waiting for the next opportunity. Her rifle rested across her knees, but her mind drifted. The letter, the dog tags, the words she had held close all these months. She read them again quietly, letting each line sink in. "I see you. I know you're trying. You are enough." Enough. The words settled in her chest like a stone she had carried for years, finally released. She allowed herself a moment to believe it. Not for long, not fully, but enough to feel the warmth of purpose, the tether of human connection, the fragile thread that linked her to something beyond survival. A movement at the trench edge drew her attention. The young recruit, trembling but alive, had been observing the distant horizon. She leaned close, voice barely a whisper. "Watch, learn. You survive because you act, not because you wait." He nodded, eyes wide. She saw comprehension flicker like a small light in a cave. The lesson was not in victory, not in killing, not in avoiding death. It was in presence, awareness, courage. The battlefield had taken much from them all, but tonight they had preserved enough of themselves to endure. She walked the trench slowly, taking stock. Broken sandbags, scattered rifles, spent shells. Every footprint, every mark of human presence told a story. She paused at a body, carefully turned it over, and noted the name. A young private she had guided through the chaos. Alive. She exhaled quietly, allowing herself the smallest measure of relief. Sometimes survival meant small victories. Sometimes redemption was a quiet acknowledgment of effort, endurance, and care. She returned to her alcove, rifle across her knees, eyes on the horizon. The trench was quiet now, almost peaceful, but the weight of responsibility remained. And it always would. The sun climbed higher, warming the mud but not the shadows. She touched her dog tags again, pressed the letter to her chest, and whispered, "I am still trying. I will not fail again." And for the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small, fragile hope. Not pride, not joy, not relief, just hope. Enough to keep standing, enough to keep returning, enough to carry her through the nights yet to come. Because redemption was not about being remembered. It was not about medals. It was not about the approval of others. It was about showing up. For herself, for the living, for every fragile thread of humanity left in the world. And she would continue to do so until the war ended or she no longer could. The trench was quiet. The sky stretched wide and pale above, and in that stillness she found a moment of grace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did the orders feel heavier than any rifle? The morning had barely begun when the captain summoned her. His tent smelled of coffee, damp canvas, and tension. Maps were spread across the table, pinned with crude weights, lines drawn in pencil like arteries of war. "Intel suggests a raid at dawn," he said, voice flat, eyes scanning her face for a reaction. "You lead the recon team, high risk, minimal support, extraction window is narrow, if you fail." He let the words hang. The unsaid was always heavier. Failure wasn't an option, not now, not ever. She nodded, silent. Her mind raced, threading through contingencies, angles, calculations. She had learned long ago that hesitation could kill. But this wasn't just survival. It was a chance to correct, to act decisively, to carve a small space for redemption in a world that demanded nothing but blood and endurance. The team assembled quietly. 4 soldiers, each carrying the weight of their own fears, their own failures, their own hopes. The young recruit, now steadier but still eyes wide with the unspoken terror of war. The corporal, calm, seasoned, a presence she relied upon more than she could admit. And 2 others, new faces hardened by circumstance, moving through shadows like ghosts. She gave no pep talk. None was needed. Actions spoke louder than words. But she cast a glance at each, letting them know silently, "I see you. We endure together." They moved out, trench by trench, the ground slick with mud, the morning cold biting through uniforms. Every step was measured, every sound muted, every glance sharp. The world was fragile and they were intruders in its chaos. No man's land stretched before them, twisted wire and cratered earth a testament to battles past. She counted silently as they advanced, shadows merging with shadow, eyes scanning for movement. The target was a forward enemy post, small, fortified, but critical. Intelligence suggested it housed weapons caches and communications equipment. Destroy it, and the next wave of attacks could be blunted. Fail, and the next wave would strike with deadly precision. She led the approach, careful, deliberate. The first sniper perch loomed ahead, a silhouette against the pale dawn. She signaled and the team adjusted. Every movement was choreographed, silent, practiced. Yet beneath the tactical precision, her mind turned inward, threading through memory. The convoy, the checkpoint, the friend she had failed, every hesitation replayed like a film she could not escape. And now she was here, given the chance to act differently. They reached the first perimeter. Enemy guards moved in predictable patterns, unaware of the approach. She raised her binoculars, observing. The pulse in her neck throbbed, tension coiled like a spring. "Wait for my signal," she whispered. The corporal's eyes met hers. No words, agreement, trust. The young recruit's hands shook slightly, fingers brushing his rifle. She reached out, briefly touching his shoulder. "Steady," she said, not a command, just presence. The first shot cracked the dawn. One guard dropped silently. Another moved, alerted. Chaos erupted. She moved like a shadow, rifle steady, every step calculated. The team followed, disciplined, methodical. Yet the human cost pressed against her chest. The enemy were not just numbers. They were men with families, fears, stories, and she had to act anyway. This was war, and redemption demanded action, not hesitation. Inside the post, the stench of sweat, metal, and fear was overwhelming. She signaled the team to split, demolition, extraction, overwatch. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, echoing memories she could not escape. A flash of movement near a door. She froze, recognized the posture, hesitated. Then she remembered the friend she couldn't save, the hesitation that had cost a life. Not tonight. Her rifle barked, the threat neutralized. Another movement, this time near the communications console. She sprinted forward, the sound of gunfire mingling with her heartbeat, adrenalized precision driving her. She reached the console, explosives in hand. Fingers moved swiftly, methodically. She set charges, counting each step, every motion a mantra, no hesitation, no failure. Redemption lies in action. Outside, the young recruit faltered under fire, caught in a crossfire. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted, dragging him behind cover, breath burning, muscles screaming. "You okay?" she whispered, pressing him into the shadows. He nodded, wide-eyed, clutching his rifle. "You survive because you act," she reminded him softly. "And you act because you must, remember that." The corporal covered her flank as she detonated the explosives. The post erupted in fire and smoke, shredding communications, crippling weapons caches. The enemy scrambled, disoriented, retreating in chaos. Mission accomplished. But victory was never clean. The acrid smoke burned her lungs. The screams of the wounded pressed at her chest. She pressed the dog tags to her heart, whispered, "I see you. I am still trying." And in that moment, she realized something essential. Redemption was not about undoing the past. It was about acting decisively in the present every time, for the lives she could touch, for the hope she could preserve. Extraction was tense. Enemy reinforcements approached. The team moved like ghosts through mud and wire, fire from rifles cracking the dawn. She covered them, methodical, controlled, precise. The young recruit stumbled again, exhausted. She caught him, dragged him, whispered reassurances. Each act was a thread tying her to humanity, a reminder that she could endure without losing herself entirely. The corporal fell back beside her, silent, eyes scanning. A shared glance passed, recognition, acknowledgment, unspoken respect. They emerged from no man's land at last, battered, exhausted, alive. Back at the trench, the team assessed damage and casualties. Minimal losses, mission complete. She sat against the mud wall, rifle resting across her knees, dog tags cold against her chest. The letter from home pressed in her pocket. She read the lines again, silently, savoring the rare warmth of reassurance. "I see you. I know you're trying. You are enough." She let herself believe it this time, even if only for a moment. Because enough wasn't perfection. Enough wasn't glory. Enough was enduring, acting, surviving, and protecting the fragile humanity left in the world. Evening came, soft and gray, and she walked the trench slowly, observing the living, the wounded, the survivors. Every small gesture, every whispered word, every steady hand became a testament to endurance. She touched her dog tags again, pressed the letter to her chest, and whispered, "I am still trying, and I will keep trying." Because she knew, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that redemption was not a destination, a medal or praise. It was the quiet act of showing up, of acting, of enduring. And she would continue to do so night after night, trench after trench, life after life, until the war ended, or she no longer could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did the trench feel endless, even in daylight? The morning had come soft and gray, washing the battlefield in muted tones. Mud glistened beneath broken wire, and the scent of spent gunpowder lingered like a ghost of the nights before. Soldiers moved quietly, checking rifles, tending wounds, their eyes carrying the weight of countless battles. She walked slowly, boots heavy with mud, fingers brushing her rifle. The dog tags rested against her chest, familiar weight grounding her, pressing her back to the present. The letter was in her pocket, folded neatly, worn edges soft from constant touch. She hadn't read it today, but she didn't need to. Its message was etched into her mind. I see you. I know you're trying. You are enough. Enough. She repeated the word silently, testing it, tasting it. Could it be true? Could she finally allow herself to believe that endurance, not perfection, was redemption? The young recruit followed at a careful distance. He had survived every night, every ambush, every shelling. She had guided him, protected him, pushed him, and sometimes silently watched him flinch at the echoes of her own past. "You'll be okay," she murmured softly, almost to herself. "You'll survive." He nodded, too old now in his eyes for someone barely out of training. The innocence was gone, replaced by the hard knowledge that survival demanded more than courage. It demanded endurance, vigilance, and the willingness to act when hesitation could kill. She glanced at him and realized something. She had survived not just for herself, but for those who had followed her, for those who needed her presence to tether themselves to life. The corporal returned from the far end of the trench, a quiet presence in the muted morning. He offered her a cup of lukewarm coffee, steam rising faintly, carrying a fragile comfort into the air thick with past violence. She accepted, pressing it to her hands, letting the warmth seep slowly into her chest. "Another quiet day," he said, voice low. "Not a promise, not a wish, just fact." She nodded. Quiet days were rare, but when they came, they were heavy with reflection. Her eyes wandered over the trench, the remnants of battle, the scars in mud and wire, the lives still clinging to existence. Each footprint told a story. Each ruined sandbag whispered of endurance. Each soldier, moving cautiously, carried silent burdens alongside her own. The sun climbed higher, pale and weak, revealing the battlefield in stark detail. Twisted metal, scattered shells, and broken planks littered the earth, yet life persisted. Men moved cautiously, but they moved. Survival had become a rhythm, endurance a mantra, and through it all she had remained present, a quiet guide, a steady hand in chaos. She pressed her fingers to the dog tags beneath her collar. Cold, solid, reminding her of what she carried: memory, guilt, responsibility, and hope, all wrapped together in a fragile steel embrace. She let herself remember the nights she had feared, the hesitations that had cost lives, the mistakes she had sworn never to repeat. And now here she stood, not unbroken, not triumphant in the way stories spoke of heroes, but enduring, still present, still acting, still choosing. That, she realized, was redemption. Movement caught her eye. The young recruit had paused, staring across the mud. She followed his gaze. A small group of local villagers emerged from the ruins beyond no man's land, carrying food, water, and medicine. Their faces were weary, hollowed by fear and loss, but alive. She saw in them the same fragile hope she had been protecting in the trench, the human cost that existed beyond orders, beyond missions, beyond survival. And in that moment she understood fully. Every night she had endured, every life she had preserved, every action taken, was not just for the soldiers in the trench. It was for humanity itself. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself a rare, private recognition. She had not failed. The morning passed in quiet work. Soldiers tended to equipment, repaired sandbags, and shared sparse, wordless moments of acknowledgment. The trench was alive, but alive in the fragile, tenuous way of a battlefield that had seen too much yet persisted. She walked among them, observing, a hand on a shoulder here, a nod there, a whispered instruction to check the perimeter, every gesture small, silent, almost unnoticed. But in them she left traces of guidance, strength, and care. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She touched her dog tags again, pressed the letter in her pocket lightly, whispered, "I am still trying." And in that whisper, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in months: completeness. Not triumph, not glory, just the quiet satisfaction of having endured, acted, and preserved life where she could. Afternoon came with thin light. Clouds drifted overhead, casting the trench in alternating shadows and pale sun. She paused, rifle resting loosely across her knees, and allowed herself to remember. The convoy, the checkpoint, the friend she could not save, every hesitation, every mistake, every night she had sat in darkness, waiting, watching, preparing to act. And now, after all that, she had acted decisively. She had protected lives, influenced others, and remained present through chaos. Redemption was not perfect. It would never be clean, but it was present, it was alive, and that was enough. She let herself breathe, slowly, deeply, fully. As the sun dipped toward evening, the corporal approached, standing beside her silently. They shared no words, only presence. The young recruit lingered a few feet behind, eyes bright with a newfound steadiness. She looked out over no man's land. Wire, mud, and scars stretched endlessly. Somewhere beyond, the enemy waited, unknowing. But for this moment the trench held. Life persisted, and she was still here. The corporal finally spoke. "You've kept showing up," he said, voice low. "That's all anyone can do." She didn't answer immediately. She only pressed her dog tags, feeling the cold metal bite into her chest. Then she whispered to herself, and maybe to the trench itself, "I am still trying, and I will keep trying." The young recruit heard it and nodded subtly, understanding, even if he could not articulate the weight of that statement. Night fell softly, a quiet blanket over the battlefield. The trench became a fragile cocoon of human presence. Fires burned low. Shadows stretched long and silent. She lay against the wall, rifle beside her, eyes on the distant stars barely visible above smoke and haze. She allowed herself a final reflection. Survival had brought her this far. Action had saved lives. Endurance had preserved hope. Redemption was not a moment, a medal, or recognition. It was a daily act of presence, courage, and care. And she had endured. She pressed the dog tags to her lips, whispered one final acknowledgment to the past, to the friend she could not save, to the nights of fear, to the battles endured. "I see you, I am still trying, and I will keep trying." The trench was quiet. The wind stirred faintly, carrying the scent of earth and smoke, mud and life. Somewhere beyond, the battlefield waited. But for this night the soldiers survived. The young recruit slept. The corporal kept watch. And she, weary but unbroken, allowed herself the quiet victory of presence, endurance, and fragile hope. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that silence, in that presence, in that quiet acknowledgment of life preserved and hope maintained, she found the peace that had been eluding her all along. Redemption had arrived, not with fanfare but with quiet resilience. And she was ready for whatever came next.